Socially distanced and masked world of the King Institute for Faith and Culture this fall. We glad to have a few of us here with us in person, and welcome as well to those of you who are online, either through the live webcast or later on. It's a delight to be able to have some kind of event this fall. We've been so constrained owing to the pandemic, but it's wonderful to be together at least a few times this fall, and I'm very pleased that our faculty and student lecturers have agreed to go ahead this fall. This morning, the faculty lecture continues the old tradition of King students selecting 2 faculty members every year to give them a talk about something related to their research or their personal interests. And we're very pleased that Jodi is going to be the latest in that long string of faculty lectures. We do have one more event this fall, and we will be here again at 9:15 on November 2nd. That will be for our second student lecture by Allison Pettix. So we do have one more event this fall, and look forward to that. So I'm now going to turn it over for the introduction. Go ahead.
Thank you. Morning all. As we've all come together today, before we could have sat amongst each other, but now we're physically distanced and virtual. As humans in society, we are all viewed as social beings. This is in our nature through everyday interactions, phone calls, messages, emails, business commute, and especially through teaching, educating our current and future generations. It was once said, and I quote, "I am only one, but I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something, and I will not let what I cannot do interfere with what I can do." Edward Everett Hale. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Never, never be afraid to do what's right, especially if the well-being of a person or animal is at stake. Society's punishments are small compared to the wounds we inflict on our soul when we look the other way." With these quotes in mind, I was requested to stand before you this morning and bestow the honor and privilege of introducing this morning's speaker, whom is a faculty member of King University. So it is my greatest honor and pleasure to not only stand before you in this capacity, but to share this opportunity to introduce to you a person whom to me is the most astounding, amazing, accomplished, unique, intelligent, compassionate individual I know, whom is an exemplar in her field, whom is and has grown to be the person that I not only have the honor and privilege of introducing to you this morning, but more so the person whom is very dear to me, whom holds my heart and is my rock, my support, my world, and the most amazing person in the world to me, my fiancée, Dr. Jodi Helbert. Dr. Helbert holds a Bachelor of Social Work, a Master of Social Work, and a PhD in Social Work. She's a board-certified diplomat in trauma-informed clinical social work and a member of the American Academy of Christian Counselors, the National Association of Social Workers, as well as the North American Associations of Christians in Social Work, the International Consortium of Social Work Developers, the International Federation of Social Workers, and Phi Alpha, the International Social Work Honor Society. Dr. Helbert has had the honor of being named Social Work Today magazine's top 10 deserving and dedicated social workers. She has also been bestowed the honored appointment of Kentucky Colonel and has received the Public Service Award for Distinguished Citizenship. In addition to these exemplary accomplishments, she's an ordained reverend and within the King University campus serves on various committees, is a faculty sponsor for the Social Work Action Group and the King University chapter of International Social Work Honor Society, Chi Omega. Dr. Helbert has had various publications and presentations over her tenure, some of which are Trauma-Informed Systems of Care, Pathophysiology of the Brain in Active Addiction, Neuroplasticity, Brain Behavior, Asepsis, Psychiatric Medication Management, Cultural and Human Diversity, Human Behavior, Pathophysiology of the Brain in Alzheimer's Disease, Oppositional Defiant Disorder, Conduct Disorder, Autism Spectrum Disorder, Borderline Personality Disorder, Death and Dying, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and has contributed to the development of the Specialized Social Work Practice Curricular Guide for Substance Use. Dr. Helbert is the founding coordinator for the Bachelor Social Work program at King University, and whom has not only developed the program, but also teaches and has proven great success in educating students for the last 7 years in understanding, learning, and living the motto of service and not serve us. Dr. Helbert, through her tenure at King University, has continuously grown the BSW program and the attendance every semester, making the BSW program one of the most sought-after programs for in-class and online learning. Dr. Helbert, in my view, is a highly accomplished individual with a wealth of knowledge in the social work sector and the most kind-hearted individual I know. She has 2 daughters, Dr. Brandy Fuentes and Miss Cassie McLaughlin, 4 grandsons, Rio, Nico, Sage, and Atticus, whom she adores greatly. So with the greatest pride, honor, and privilege, and without further ado, I introduce to you Dr. Helbert.
I'm going to have to unmask because I can't see. My glasses just fog up. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's so wonderful to see you. It's been so long and I've missed seeing you. And thank you, Damien, for those kind words. What a kind introduction. Also, I'd like to extend my gratitude to the IT department for all of their hard work. These guys are unsung heroes. They have worked diligently behind the scenes, making sure that we're all connected, and so that events like this one are transmitted across the miles and archived for future viewing. I'm honored to join you and to speak to you in the 100th year following the passage of women's suffrage, 55 years following the passage of the Voting Rights Act, which legalized the right to vote for African Americans. Many people have fought for this right, and voting is a big deal. So I want to compel you to raise your voice and cast your vote. Okay. So when I learned I'd been selected as one of the faculty lecturers for this academic year, I debated about which topic I would share with you. There are so many that are important to me. After all, you're mine for the next 40 minutes, so I want this opportunity to be meaningful. So I debated about sharing information about the disease processes of addiction. Northeast Tennessee is an area widely considered to be ground zero for the opioid epidemic. Most of us know someone who's been directly impacted by the disease of addiction. So talking openly about it is important for awareness and resolution. I also considered talking about the 6 core values of social work practice. Ethical social workers are expected to serve others. In our program, we have a mantra, and Damien mentioned it earlier. It focuses on the perspective shift from serve us to service. Finley Green has a great quote on the wall outside of her office that reads, "If service is beneath you, leadership is beyond you." I love that. Social workers also advocate for social, restorative, and economic justice. Did you know that fairness is a synonym for justice? Social workers also honor the inherent dignity and worth of every person, which means, in part, amplifying the best in people, which is their strengths. One way we do this is through person-first language. We don't define our clients by a disorder or a diagnosis. For example, we wouldn't say a depressed person, but rather a person with depression. Or better yet, just refer to them as a person. After all, they are a person first. A disorder or a diagnosis doesn't define who we are. Dignity and worth are also honored by recognizing the pain and limitations caused by racial and ethnic discrimination and advocating for equity and inclusion. We also hold unconditional positive regard for our clients. We embrace that all people are made in the imago Dei, or the image of God. When we remember that, and we keep in mind the promise made in Philippians 1:6, that he who began a good work in you is faithful to bring it to completion, then we can have hope, even in the midst of difficulties, that we're all a work in progress. So social workers also recognize that human relationships are important. Humans are social creatures wired for connection with each other. Physical distancing, not social distancing. I have an issue with the terminology. Due to the pandemic has forced us to be apart from one another to ensure survival. This creates a paradox where being together has potential to bring harm to us, but being apart can be harmful as well. Loneliness creates an existential crisis, but it's also created a public health crisis. According to a 2018 Harvard study, loneliness contributes to all the major health and mental health issues: heart disease, cancers, dementia, high blood pressure, diabetes, infections, anxiety, depression, insomnia, suicide, addiction, and the list just goes on. Whoops. According to Hockley's research, loneliness increases mortality by 45%. 45%. It's more deadly than air pollution. You can see it in the blue, 6%. Obesity at 23%, or alcohol abuse at 37%. Amy Moran, a clinical social worker, concluded in her research that loneliness is as bad for your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Psychology Today says that the presence of loneliness reflects the absence of connection, not the absence of people. It's completely possible to feel alone in a crowded room. Alongside the hundreds of thousands of deaths from COVID-19 is the growing epidemic of deaths of despair. According to Shanahan and colleagues, deaths of despair are deaths related to isolation, overdose, suicide, or alcohol or drug-related illnesses. Some people have been quarantined alone in their homes, while others have been sheltering in place, isolated with an abuser. Or they might be stuck with a sea of toxic family members. Mortality from deaths of despair far surpasses anything seen in the U.S. since the dawn of the 20th century, 100 years. Along with so many other things, deaths of despair have also been steadily increasing during the pandemic. According to new research from the Robert Graham Center for Policy Studies, it's expected that as many as 75,000 more people will die from drug or alcohol misuse or suicide before the pandemic ends. It's astounding. Think about where relationships should fall in our priorities. Regardless of the situation, there's no lack of people suffering from COVID-19. This invisible virus seems to have brought the world to its knees. The last two social work core values are integrity and competence, which are self-explanatory. So operate in honesty and do the right thing even when no one's watching, and know what you're doing. Then I thought that as one of the few faculty members of color on this campus, that I'd be remiss if I didn't speak to you about the ubiquitous nature of racism and the resiliency of people of color. As a psychotherapist, shouldn't I also speak about mental health issues and how the coronavirus has exacerbated those? This pandemic seems to have touched nearly every part of our lives in 2020. In fact, the subtext of my planner since March has been, very few things are as we had planned. In social work, we call this the loss of our assumptive world. In the assumptive world construct, we often grieve major changes of things, of how we assume that things would be, and we've taken for granted that those things would be a certain way, so we have come to count on that. When those things fail to hold true, the world seems to just fall apart. The feelings that are evoked are greatly subjective, but they're often feelings of sadness, grief, anxiety, and even violation, as if this thing or this assumption of consistency has somehow been stolen from us. You know things are really serious when Walmart closes at 10 p.m. and you can't even count on the NBA schedule. Don't judge me. It's an individual's perception of the loss, whatever that loss may be, and how it's experienced by that individual that creates the subjectivity. These non-death losses are difficult to measure, and therefore they're often difficult to validate. So in practice, we validate the subjective appraisal of the event from each individual's perspective. It's for them to decide. And we shouldn't even attempt to compare losses or try to weigh them like this loss is bigger than that loss. In fact, how much and to what extent that loss robs us of peace of mind and the ripple effects it causes are left to the individual to decide. We're living through something that's unprecedented, and I know you've heard that lots of times. And the losses will continue to stack up if we fail to take inventory of all of the good things. Then I finally settled on discussing how adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, create traumas that have lasting and detrimental impact on our brains, our bodies, our behavior, and society if not successfully addressed. So this talk is dedicated to all those who've experienced some kind of trauma or cared about someone who has. So just a quick show of hands. How many of you know what ACEs are? Okay, a few. So ACE is an acronym for Adverse Childhood Experiences, which refers to any sudden or pervasive or ongoing events in a child's life that undermines their ability to cope and may hinder normal development. ACEs can include exposure to various forms of abuse or neglect, or household dysfunction like witnessing violence, substance dependence, mental illness, separation or divorce, incarceration of a household member, homelessness, or loss of a parent or caregiver. Even social rejection is traumatizing, as well as discrimination or poverty. And not just economic poverty, but relational poverty. With ACEs, there's often an absence of supportive caregiver relationships to buffer the developing body and brain from a barrage of stress hormones. The pandemic has triggered an increase in all of those domains that I'd mentioned. Since March, the rates of domestic violence alone has skyrocketed across the globe. These traumas create turmoil across the lifespan. Adverse childhood experiences were the subject of a landmark epidemiological study in the 90s. On the ACEs questionnaire, for every yes that you would answer to one of the 10 traumas that were studied, you would get 1 point on your ACE score. Many people in the study had scores as high as 6 to 10 ACEs. These people are our colleagues, our students, our family members, or even us. So people with ACE scores this high have been marinated in trauma. And when something is marinated, it gets all the way in, which makes the healing process very complicated. Not undoable, but complicated. Our experiences and the meanings that we ascribe to them often shape who we become. We all want to live happily ever after and to experience more pleasure than pain, more delight than despair, more joy than sorrow. And much of that comes from successful relationships. ACEs are almost always caused by a parent or caregiver. Thus, those foundational relationships and bonds of attachment are damaged. The choreography of successful relationships is masterful, but in a world that's primarily relationally impoverished, where nearly 40% of children don't grow up with secure attachments to their parents, that's a trauma that damages a child's inner map. And it's the inner map that drives everything about what we do, how we love, how we live, how we work, how we parent, and how we lead, reminding us that life's beauty is inseparable from its fragility. These problems are further exacerbated when so many children are being raised with more screen time than authentic connections to empathic human beings. Or far worse, societal problems like the opioid epidemic that I mentioned earlier. And for all of that, our education system has some broken parts because it's largely focused on fertilizing and building and growing the cognitive part of the brain when that's not the only way the brain works. The brain is a highly interrelated organ in socio-emotional health, which is an essential precursor to healthy executive functioning and academic success. In fact, socio-emotional learning has been consistently overshadowed by a compulsion to raise test scores. This only serves to increase stress when kids really they need positive, developmentally appropriate, relationship-rich school environments. We don't want to fail the very students that we're seeking to empower with an education. So what is trauma? The American Psychological Association defines trauma as an emotional, psychological, or physiological response to a terrible event or a series of events, usually some kind of threat to survival. Essentially, there are three distinct types of trauma. Those are acute trauma, which results from a single stressful or dangerous event, but it's generally short-term, like a car accident. And as bad as that sounds, we do tend to move past that and get back in a vehicle eventually. Chronic trauma, however, is a bit more complicated. This results from repeated and prolonged exposure to highly stressful events. It's so persistent, in fact, that it doesn't leave time and space in between for healing to occur. So some examples of chronic trauma are child abuse, bullying, racism, and domestic violence. And then there's complex trauma, which results from exposure to multiple traumatic events that tend to be ongoing. So trauma is often complex in nature because it may not just be a terrifying event that's traumatizing, but often a life that's filled with terrifying events, where everything about it is traumatizing. Perception and context are everything, and how someone perceives that event is what gives it impact. It's an individual's experience of that event and not necessarily the event themselves that tend to be traumatizing. So when traumas occur during developmental stages, it often damages the ability for healthy attachments and bonding to occur because children haven't learned to trust that their needs are going to be met. The very relationships that were supposed to nurture and guide them have been absent. How many of you remember Erik Erikson's psychosocial stages of development? Okay, all right. So the very first stage is trust versus mistrust. So during infancy, children rely on adults to meet their basic needs for survival. And so when caregivers are non-responsive or insensitive to those needs, the baby begins to see the world as unsafe and unpredictable. And this engenders feelings of anxiety, fear, and mistrust. So this mistrust causes an inability to bond, first to the caregivers and then later with significant others, creating relationships filled with turmoil across the lifespan. And it's a defense mechanism that's learned in infancy. A failure to bond correlates with a failure to experience intimacy with others. So think of intimacy as intimacy. So survivors of chronic trauma, they really don't want people to let them in to see who they are, who they already believe themselves to be, that they may realize that they're flawed and unlovable. Immediately in the aftermath of a traumatic event, shock and denial are typical. These are normal reactions to abnormal events. Longer-term reactions include unpredictable emotions that range from elation and laughter to sadness and crying, but also fear and anger. Sometimes people overreact to situations, and then at other times they extremely underreact and they're passive. Many experience frequent flashbacks or nightmares of the trauma and are easily triggered by them. Inattention or the appearance of daydreaming is common, and it's often confused with ADD in children. Their ability to be fully present has essentially been stripped away. Relationships may be strained because their emotions are on a roller coaster, and people involved with them just don't know what to make of it. They often have an exaggerated startle response. If you startle someone who's been traumatized, they typically will jump out of their skin. They often self-medicate to try to numb the psychic pain. It may present as an increase in drinking and drugging, but it may also present as overeating or some other disordered eating. Self-harmful behaviors are typical, and then also sometimes survivors experience somatic physical symptoms like headaches, shortness of breath, stomach aches, backaches. But survivors of trauma are often sicker because toxic stress suppresses the immune system, making the body more susceptible to mental and physical illness and disease. Dis-ease leads to disease. Samsha calls these responses adaptations to trauma. They often occur long after the traumatic event has abated. So there's no question that trauma reveals itself in our bodies if we fail to deal with it. We tend to bottle our emotions, suppressing them, and when emotions are ignored, they just get stronger. In social work, we call this amplification. I just spoke to my students about it the other day. The more we try to push that feeling aside, the greater its hold on you. Internal pain always comes out, always. Sometimes it comes out as anger, as self-destructive behavior, as mental or physical disease. In fact, the very word emotion means to move out. So survivors are taught to show up authentically to their emotions, to feel their feelings, all of them, even the ones that they deem as messy or painful, like sadness and grief, without rigidly suppressing those feelings. Rigidity in the face of complexity is toxic. But we live in a culture that values relentless positivity. And when people express painful emotions, they often feel shamed and rejected. So forcing ourselves to just stay positive has become a new form of moral correctness. Denial is the offspring of forced positivity. When we force ourselves to deny our feelings in the presence of pain, then we lose our capacity to develop skills to deal with the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. Rather than jumping to solution, I teach my clients to see the emotions that they may view as negative as inherently valuable. Our emotions are data. They're a signpost for things that we care about, like fairness and equity. If you watch the news and you feel rage when you watch the news, perhaps it's a signpost that you also value fairness and equity, and remember that fairness is a synonym for justice. So research shows that the radical acceptance of all of our emotions is the cornerstone to resilience and thriving. Learn to feel your feelings and learn those contours of your emotions. What is that emotion telling you? Accurately assessing your emotions will help you to take values-connected steps. This is introspection. It's an essential skill for social workers because being willing to and able to see yourself, then you're better able to see other people. I also tell my clients that the only way over is through, and it takes courage. But I also tell them that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is fear walking. So there are lots more serious physical and mental health consequences of trauma. The bottom row represents people with 0 ACEs in comparison with people with ACE scores of 4 to 6. As you can see, these people with ACE scores of 4 to 6 have a 2.5 times greater risk propensity for developing COPD or hepatitis, and are at 4.5 times greater risk of developing depression and anxiety than someone with 0 ACEs. The World Health Organization says that depression is the leading cause of disability on the planet, outstripping heart disease and outstripping cancer. They also have a 7 times greater risk of developing substance dependence, and also have an increased risk propensity for suicide that is 12 times that of someone with 0 ACEs. People with ACE scores of 7 or more have triple the risk of developing lung cancer and 3.5 times the risk of developing cardiovascular disease, which remains the #1 killer in the U.S. They often have an increased risk for poor educational outcomes, which often translates into instability in employment and housing. So the study also revealed that individuals in this category with ACE scores this high also have a life expectancy that was shortened by 20 years. These are just a few, but it's not just the individual that's impacted, but all of society. The neurobiological consequences of childhood trauma impact certain brain centers, like the nucleus accumbens, which is the pleasure and reward center of the brain that's been implicated in substance dependence. Childhood trauma also inhibits the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is necessary for impulse control and executive functioning, and is a critical area for rational thinking and learning new information. During heightened arousal, the prefrontal cortex shuts down to ensure complete focus on survival. Academic success, then, is effectively diminished for students who struggle to learn information. The brain is incredibly self-preserving. Remember that survivors of trauma often stay in that heightened state of arousal. So when do they have an opportunity to learn when their brains are only focused on staying safe and surviving? The limbic system, which is the emotional seat of the brain, literally becomes a survival brain, keeping you in fear response continually. And fear response, again, is fight, flight, or freeze response, which is typically activated in the presence of danger. People who grow up with significant trauma have pervasive experiences of feeling fearful and unsafe in every situation, even situations that are good and positive. So these individuals rely consistently on the basic automatic survival responses of fight, flight, or freeze. And brain scientists tell us that these automatic responses literally hijack the thinking brain. It's like a hostile takeover of the conscious mind. Survival mode is intended to be an instinct to save your life. It's not intended to be how you live your life. Children and adults who've experienced significant trauma are typically hypervigilant, constantly expectant of danger everywhere, which produces anxiety and which is emotionally and physically taxing. So everything they do is bent towards coping. So instead of learning and exploring and growing, they may be hiding and just trying to survive. Imagine that you're in a war zone. You're hypervigilant. You're thinking that there could be an enemy around every corner. You have a rush of adrenaline and cortisol causing your heart to pound intensely. Your pupils dilate for effective acuity. Your airways open up. Blood is diverted to your extremities and to your muscles to aid in your defense. Just in case you need to fight or run fast, if that's what's going to save your life. And that's effective if you're in a battle and facing an enemy. But what if that enemy lives in your home and that system stays activated continuously? Some people in those situations dissociate or they freeze, and the connection between their brains and their bodies disintegrate. Cortisol is a stress hormone, and the typical pattern of cortisol release is that it's higher in the morning to get you moving, or when you awaken. Some people awaken different points of the day. But it dissipates throughout the day, and it's usually lowest just before you fall asleep. And cortisol isn't all bad. In small quantities, it serves to heighten memory, to increase your immune system, and to lower your sensitivity to pain. However, people who suffer from toxic stress, their cortisol levels stay elevated because they've been conditioned to be constantly expectant of danger and prepared to fight. So constantly Elevated levels of cortisol are implicated in weight gain, fatigue, headaches, GI problems, anxiety, depression, high blood pressure, and heart disease. Add irritability and hot flashes, and that sounds a lot like menopause. We are not going to go there. Anyway, the fight, flight, or freeze response is a system that's intended to be adaptive and life-saving, but has become maladaptive and health and psyche damaging. So children are especially sensitive to this repeated stress activation, and because their brains and bodies are still in the process of development. Can you imagine how difficult it would be to function if alarm bells were constantly sounding in your head because of the perception of danger everywhere? And not just in dangerous situations, but in neutral situations and situations that are good and positive. After a while, they can't tell the difference. It's a profound interference in being able to be fully present and to make use of the relationships and resources around you. So how do we begin to heal brains that are wrapped in pain? So I added this meme, and I tried to put a silver streak in the therapist's hair, if you can see it. So healing is based on a partnership with a survivor of the trauma. There are several lay techniques, as well as professionally trained trauma-informed approaches, but I'll share just a few for the sake of time. First and foremost, the client's salient needs must be met before any higher needs are even pursued. So think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Those needs that are on the very base level have to be met first before we can expect transcendence, and even learning is part of that next level on Maslow's hierarchy. So grounding techniques have to be taught, especially if dissociation is present. Some that I use are mindful breathing, and I teach my students to do this. And it's easy, and it's free, and it can be done anywhere to reduce stress. The sympathetic nervous system moves with the emotions. So when we're in a state of arousal, the SNS is activated to prepare the body for action. So taking slow, deep breaths with a longer exhalation activates the parasympathetic nervous system to bring about calmness and a reduction in stress. Also, humming, singing, and laughter have a similar effect. These activities activate the vagus nerve, which is the longest cranial nerve, which in turn stimulates the parasympathetic activity and causes relaxation. Movement like yoga and Tai Chi are essential, but there's a bit of controversy around those. Also, since we know that the hurt happened in an unhealthy relationship, it takes a healthy relationship to help bring about healing. Research shows that the presence of one healthy relationship in a child's life has the ability to counteract some of the negative effects of trauma. Journaling is great. So journaling allows the survivor of the trauma to control the narrative, to process what happened to them. I tell my clients to write like no one else is reading, to tell their truths without judgment. Trauma tends to silence people. So talking and writing openly about their feelings not only is healing and restorative, it's empowering and redemptive. Survivors need to hear and to be reassured that what happened to them was not their fault. Kids are egocentric and automatically assume that things that happened are their fault. So they tend to carry those beliefs into adulthood. So responding with empathy is important. Brene Brown, she's also a social worker, says that empathy keeps us out of judgment. It validates the survivor's emotions. Empathy is feeling with others and understanding the trauma from their perspective. We also work to heal shame and perfectionism. We emphasize the survivor's strengths, and we build on those. We focus on trust and safety, establishing rapport with our clients. We include non-traditional collaborations and expanded community supports such as faith communities, friends and family, etc., and connecting survivors with supportive people also guards against loneliness. Also, a well-coordinated, multidisciplinary team approach is essential and should include all the systems that are involved in that individual's life, so home and school and therapy, their medical provider, etc. In social work, we use psychodynamic approaches to treat trauma. Freud's psychodynamic theory of the psyche asserts that our behavior and the mental issues we suffer can be traced beyond our conscious self-control, that our subconscious mind and the innate impulses that we may not even be aware of are what influence the ways in which we behave and are strongly influenced by childhood experiences. Other more professionally trained trauma treatment approaches are EMDR, which is an acronym for eye movement desensitization reprocessing, and can be thought of as a physiologically based therapy. It replicates the REM movement, or the rapid eye movement that naturally occurs during sleep, to interrupt that survival loop, and moves the trauma away from the affected area, causing the traumatic response to dissipate. Neurofeedback has a similar mechanism. It uses electrodes that are attached to the head, and the clients are expected to move an object on the screen using their own brain waves or other electrical activity of their nervous system. This exercises the brain and strengthens the mind-body connections, and it teaches self-regulation of the brain's functions. Also, there's the bottom-up approach, not to be confused with the bottoms-up approach. The bottom-up approach is part of the neurosequential model of therapeutics designed by van der Kolk. The reason the bottom-up approach is used is because the brain develops from the bottom up. Brain development starts with the brainstem, then the limbic system forms, which is where childhood attachment wounds typically take place. Emotions and behavior are also regulated there. The cortical areas are formed last, and remember, that's the area where executive functioning takes place, which is rational thought, logic, impulse control, and learning. And sadly, there doesn't seem to be one treatment that deals with the full catastrophe of childhood trauma, but several varied approaches. These are just a few that are effective and helpful to help interrupt that survival loop, but we know reasonably well where to start with targeted assessments. So when the brain is, as you know, highly plastic, and able to learn new ways of thinking and develop new circuitry. So when clients are informed about neuroplasticity, they feel incredibly hopeful because they realize that they are able to heal from trauma. So my message to survivors of trauma is to never give up. Your lives have meaning. You matter. You're important. You're bigger than what happened to you. Perhaps it contributed to shaping you, but it didn't make you. People who haven't experienced trauma often can't seem to grasp those struggles, but maybe now they can and will respond with more empathy. Insight is everything. There are no stories more inspirational, no tales of triumph more uplifting, no greater light of hope than the resilience of those who were once immersed in a traumatic world, fighting to survive. Excuse me, you're not alone. There are so many others who face this day as you have, fighting to overcome the difficulties you've experienced and understand your resolve and resilience and have walked that hard road. And my prayer for you is for healing and restoration of a sense of normalcy. Make your time count. Be the positive force that can help someone else because of where you've been. You can change lives. What the enemy meant for harm for you, God turns it for good. My message for everyone else is to suspend judgment, to operate in kindness and compassion. I'm sorry, you guys. And to show love, even if you don't know that someone has a past history of trauma. It's the power of the tribe. We can help each other and be thoughtful with the words we use. Words have power, so use life-giving words. Everything that is was spoken into existence with 4 words. Let there be light. So love is a choice. Love is sacrificial and kind. We are the Imago Dei. Your hand is God's hand. Train your eyes to see people through God's lens. You never know what they may be going through. So be empathic. Love like Him. Love never fails. I'm going to leave you with a verse from Philippians 2:4. Let each of you look not only to your own interest, but the interest of others. Thank you.
Thank you, Jodi, so much. This is a plaque to commemorate your participation as one of the King Faculty Lectures. Thank you so much for this, and please join me in thanking Jodi once again.
Thank you.